What is going on, guys? Welcome to the channel, and today we are going to talk about how to become a full stack Python web developer. Basically, what steps you need to take, what you need to learn, how to learn it, and in what order you should learn it. And it should take me a couple of minutes to explain, and if you don't have time to watch this video, then you're going to spend more time on learning full stack development than you should, because you're going to learn things that are not important for you, at least at the beginning. And honestly, there are so many things you can learn, guys, and it's so easy to go down the rabbit hole of learning and spending a lot of time. Some of the things you learn might be important, but they are not going to help you get the job as a full stack web developer, if that's what you want. And for most of you watching this, I think that's the goal. So if you don't want to waste your time, then let's dive in. The first thing that we should make clear is what is full stack development. When it comes to application development, there are two sides of development. The first one is the server or the backend. That's all of the activities that happen under the hood of our web application. For example, saving or pulling data from the database, charging the user's credit card, sending email notifications. Basically, the backend has all of the logic of our web application. Another side is the client or the front end. That's what users see in the browser. That's the visual part of the application, the user's interface. When it comes to full stack development, full stack developers are responsible for both sides of the application. They write logic on the backend, and they also build user interfaces. To make things simpler, you can also call full stack developers just application developers, because they are able to build applications from scratch without any help. And if you're not sure what you want to do you want to become a full stack Python web developer, or do you want to become just a backend Python web developer, then I have a video about that. Link will be in the description. This video should help you make the decision. Now let's talk about how to become a full stack Python web developer. If you want to become a full stack Python web developer, I assume that you prefer working on the backend more than on the front end, and also Python is the language that you like or would like to work with. If it's not the case, then probably you shouldn't learn Python at all, since frontend requires you to know JavaScript, and if you are a full stack Python web developer, then you need to know two languages, Python and JavaScript. And if you don't enjoy working with Python, then there is no need to learn it. You can use JavaScript on the backend and on the frontend as well. But personally, I prefer Python on the backend, and if you like Python as well, then that's where your focus should be. So the first step is to learn Python, and you should learn it well. Don't try to jump on the next step too early. You should have a really good understanding of Python, because all of the other things that you are going to learn next are going to be based on Python. And if you don't know Python, then it's going to be difficult to learn all of these things. So what I'm saying is you need to master fundamentals. And also don't forget about object-oriented programming. It is quite important. So what I recommend you to do is I recommend you to solve different coding challenges online, because the best way to learn anything is to practice that. And there are a lot of different websites where you can do that. I remember I used Checkio, also Code Wars, but you can choose wherever you like. Now, the next step after learning Python is learning web fundamentals and learning the basics of Django framework. When it comes to web development in Python community, there are two main frameworks, Django and Flask. I recommend you learn Django because Django is more popular, it has more libraries, it has more tutorials, and I think it's even simpler than Flask. Flask looks simpler only at the beginning, but when it comes to building real-world application, if you want to do that in Flask, you need to have more experience. So anyway, the focus for this step is to learn the basics of HTTP, learn how to generate a simple page in Django, learn the routing system in Django, and by routing system I mean how you can add multiple URLs and how every URL can have its own page. Also, I recommend you learn the life cycle of Django, basically what happens when the browser sends a request to the server, how Django processes this request, and how the response that Django generates after processing this request comes back to the browser. Now, after you nailed fundamentals, the next step I think is to understand the structure of a page and how to make it pretty. So you need to learn HTML and CSS. HTML is responsible for the structure and CSS is responsible for styling. Since you are not a front-end developer, you don't need to master these things. HTML is quite simple, I don't think you will have a lot of problems with that, but CSS can be a little bit challenging. Especially nowadays, it has a lot of stuff, but don't focus on that too much. Other things like Python, Django, and even JavaScript are more important for you than CSS. So by this time you should be able to generate some basic pages with Django and you should be able to style these pages. However, these pages are static. Basically, you predefined all of the content for these pages. And it is perfect when you have a landing page, about page, maybe a blog, but what if you want to have something different? What if you want a chat application or a forum or some kind of an online quiz? In these examples, you need to save data somewhere, and that's the perfect time for learning databases. Databases are quite important in web development. In fact, if you are a web developer, most of your work will be pulling or saving data to the database. So I recommend you take the databases seriously. And here are some things you need to know. Primary keys, foreign keys, relationships, one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many, aggregations, grouping, joins. These things are the most important, I think. Also, when you are learning these things, I encourage you to not only understand them in the context of Django and Django ORM, but also without any ORMs and frameworks. Just pure SQL database. How to do selects with joins, how different relationships look like in the database, what's the difference between where and having keywords, all of this stuff. Now when you understand databases, you are not limited to static pages anymore. You can build more complex applications like the examples that I mentioned before. Forums, chats, quizzes. So after you learned databases, the next natural step I think is to learn how to interact with users. And by interacting with users, I mean how to add a form to the application and how to save and process data that the users type in this form. An example of a form could be a login form or a sign-up form. These forms are quite important and pretty much every web application has authentication. So in order to build these forms, you need to understand how authentication, cookies and sessions work in Django. And by the way, I have a video about sessions in Django, so if you are interested and you want to take a look, link will be in the description. Now with all of this knowledge that you have, Python, basics of web, Django, HTML, CSS, databases, forms, authentication, sessions. With all of this, you can build pretty much any web application. However, if you are building applications just using these skills, some of them will work perfectly, but some of them can have a poor user experience if you just use these skills. And what you need to learn in order to change this, we will discuss in a minute. What I want to say now is before moving to the next step and learning new tools, I suggest you stay with what you have at the moment. And I suggest you master and practice skills that you already have. I'm not saying that you should learn everything about Django because Django has a lot of stuff And even when you get a job as a developer, you're still going to learn a lot. But what I mean is you need to write a lot of code and you need to build as many web applications as possible. You can even try to freelance if you want to do that. For some projects, the skills that you already have should be enough. Now, having said that, let's move on to the next, and it will be the last step, except for the bonus step at the end, but the step is learning how to build single page applications. And honestly, most of the applications nowadays are single page applications. They're quite popular. However, learning how to build them is going to be quite a big step. You need to learn how to build REST APIs using Django REST framework. You also need to learn JavaScript and React or Vue. You can also learn Angular instead of React or Vue if you want to, but I wouldn't recommend it. Angular is more difficult and it's less popular when you have Python on the backend. People who usually use Python on the backend, they use React or Vue on the front end. That's what I found, and that's why I do not recommend you to learn Angular. It's better to learn React or Vue instead. The reason why I decided to combine learning REST APIs and JavaScript is because if you just build REST APIs, there won't be any value in this, because you need to have front end that consumes this API. Otherwise, you just have an API that no one uses. Even though I combined all of this into one step, I don't assume that you're going to learn everything at the same time. The way I learned it is I focused on learning Django REST framework and learning how to build REST APIs first. And then when I felt comfortable with REST, I switched to JavaScript and Vue.js. And later I was assigned on a project at the university where I was able to practice all of these skills and basically learn along the way. And I recommend you do the same thing. Focus on Django REST framework first, then switch to JavaScript, decide what you want to learn, React or Vue, learn it, and when you start to feel comfortable with backend and frontend, come up with some big project idea that you can work on. Or maybe you can even start trying to find a job as a full stack developer, or maybe get some work on freelance. And those were the steps that you need to take in order to become a full stack Python web developer. And I promised you the bonus step. And the bonus step is to learn how to deploy applications. It's not required, but it can be useful, especially if you want to get some work on freelance. Because on freelance, most likely you're going to work by yourself, and you will need to be able to deploy your application. And that's it for today, guys. If you are still watching this video, I appreciate it so much. And if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. And if you're new to the channel, my name is Denis, and this channel is all about mastering web development and growing as a full stack Python web developer. If that appeals to you, consider subscribing. And if you'd like to connect with me even further, you can follow me on Twitter, link will be in the description. So thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next one.